Hi, folks. Here to introduce Minister Nixon to chat about the most recent flooding updates up north.
Thank you, Jess. Today I am joined by Mayor Don Scott and Reeve Josh Knelson to provide an update on river conditions and our collective response to flooding in Wood Buffalo and Mackenzie County. We also have representatives on hand from the Alberta Emergency Management Agency and the Alberta Environment River Forecast Centre. Both flood events continue to be active situations, with the Alberta Emergency Management Agency and staff from Environment and Parks assisting local emergency management teams as they work to respond and recover from these floods. I want to thank all the provincial and municipal staff who have worked long hours to protect impacted residents and critical infrastructure in these communities. I also want to recognize the community volunteers who have worked tirelessly to support their neighbors. You truly are an example of what it means to rise up against adversity. In Wood Buffalo, water levels have dropped significantly from the peak levels that we saw on Sunday. The Athabasca River at Fort McMurray has dropped 3.5 meters, and there has been a 1 meter drop within the Clearwater River. Our River Forecasting Center experts expect that Athabasca River water levels to continue to slowly fall throughout today. In addition, there has been a further melt of the ice on the Athabasca River, with an ice jam that was previously 25 kilometers long now down to about 13 kilometers. On the Clearwater River, we expect ice runs to continue for the next few days. This is a normal part of ice breakup, and although water levels may fluctuate, this will not lead to additional flooding in Fort McMurray. I'm also happy to report that Fort McMurray's Northern Lights Regional Healthcare Center remains operational and that the facility is not experiencing any issues with staffing or supplies. As water levels are receding, no transfers of long-term care residents or acute care patients are planned. The hospital will have potable water by Friday and will resume dialysis services starting Saturday. On the Peace River, the ice jams downstream of Fort Vermilion have released yesterday, pushing through the existing ice cover downstream. The resulting ice runs caused flooding at the Little Red River settlement. The ice run stopped and jammed again about 24 kilometers downstream of Garden River later in the evening, forcing the evacuation of approximately 800 residents in Garden River. That ice jam is now 24 kilometers long. The evacuations are in addition to approximately 13,000 people that have been evacuated from Fort McMurray area and approximately 450 people evacuated from Fort Vermilion and Tall Creek First Nation over the previous few days. Tragically, flooding on the Athabasca River claimed the life of an Albertan yesterday on the Fort McKay First Nation. And our sincere condolences go out to his family and the entire community. With the river ice continuing to melt and flow downstream, municipal authorities are now in the planning stages for re-entry. Re-entry planning will be led by municipalities with the support provided by the province through the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. It's important to remember that we still have flood water in these communities, and our first priority is to protect the communities threatened by flooding. Although residents may be anxious to return, and I do understand that, we need a number of conditions to be met in order for residents to return to their communities safely. Those conditions include flood water no longer being an imminent threat, the availability of critical infrastructure and essential services, and hazards in the area being secured. There is no question that the recovery process in this community will be lengthy, but I'm confident we will see the same type of team efforts we already observed in Fort McMurray, Fort Vermilion, and other areas affected by flooding in the days and months ahead. We will see the same resilience as people work together to restore their homes, their lives, and their communities, all while dealing with a global pandemic. And with that, I will turn it over to Reeve Knelson for his comments.
Thank you, Mr. Nixon. It's a great pleasure to announce that the flooding danger of Fort Vermilion has passed. Though flood levels do remain in Beaver Ranch. The ice has cleared, as you mentioned, downstream up to 24 kilometers downstream of Garden River. I'd like to also add that we will not allow re-entry to happen until we can safely do so. We are starting a rapid damage assessment, which which includes the assessment of all buildings in the flood zone. All buildings must be inspected for structural integrity, power, natural gas, and environmental hazards. No homes or buildings will be entered. Homeowners and or renters will be the first to enter their homes. Though the danger of additional flooding has passed, we have to ensure that the buildings are stable enough for re-entry. Roads have to be cleared and free of debris. We did notice today that there was some sinkholes in our roads that weren't even there yesterday, so we're starting to see some of that come up, so we got to make sure that that's all safe before we allow anybody in. Power lines and gas lines need to be checked, and the crews are diligently working long hours to ensure the safety of all that. A boil advisory is still in place. We're not sure how long, and that will be lifted once it can safely be done. And I guess one thing I would like to highlight, if people aren't aware, we will be doing a bus tour for evacuees today at 4 o'clock, and for any more information on that, I'd like to ask people to follow the Mackenzie County Facebook page or call the Incident Command Post at 780-927-3718. And that's about all I have for now. Thanks.
The Mayor Scott has just joined us. Let's do a quick sound check. Mayor Scott, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Super, thanks.
Well, I just want to extend my thanks to the government of Alberta for the support. The Premier and Minister Nixon have been in constant touch with this region. The Premier was up here, obviously, to do a helicopter overflight and see the devastation for himself. Just by way of an update, we have 1,230 damaged structures. And to put that into context, during the fire, many of you recall that was just a few years ago, we had 2,579, so we're about half as many as we experienced during the fire. So the support that was announced by the government of Alberta and the Premier is going to go a long way to help people. The municipality has been paying for many of the upfront costs, and we're going to continue to support the evacuees. We have our evacuees are still evacuated, and we anticipate that we're going to keep people in hotels and camps for at least another 7 days. Although if we can get people back home earlier, we're certainly going to. Much like was just discussed, we're going to have a staged re-entry when it's safe to do so. We're still at the stage where the ice is not broken yet in our region, although it appears that there's a lot of signs of optimism in the region. The ice jam has shortened significantly, but is still present, so we're still going through that. The Red Cross has recently set up in our community, so that's going to be announced later on this afternoon. So we're feeling very optimistic. We anticipate there will be a lot of insurance claims and a lot of either underinsured people or people with no insurance. So there's going to be a lot of work to do going forward. We believe the recovery period will be extensive. We don't think this will be a quick recovery, just given the number of structures that are damaged. It's basically the core of our downtown, including many businesses that are impacted. And that's the update I would have from Fort McMurray.
Thanks so much, Mayor. I'm going to turn it over for questions, please. We have a few folks on the line.
Our first question comes from Rafi Buchanan of CBC. Your line is open.
Hi, I guess the question is both for Minister Nixon and for Mayor Scott. I'm just wondering, once the recovery is underway and people do come back home, how much thought will be given to urban planning that'll move Fort McMurray away from the river?
Minister, you want to take? Oh.
I'll let.
My apologies,
no,
Minister. Did you want to begin?
No, go ahead, Mayor Scott. You start, and then I'll follow up after you.
Yeah, just to give everyone an idea of what's happening here, so the flood that we experienced in this region was a 1 in 100 year flood. So it's something it's not been experienced in a generation. The people that I've talked to who are 80, 90 years old said that there's never been anything even close to this historically. And this was unfortunately combined with the COVID-19 challenge, which made it even more challenging. But nevertheless, we have a plan for flood mitigation, and that has been underway. We've already spent about between 150 and 200 million on flood mitigation, and there are plans to spend about another 80 million to protect this region. So we're going to be looking to our provincial friends and every level of government to see if we can get more support going forward to make sure that happens, because you know, the more prevention we do, it'll get us away from situations like this. So we've done a lot of work, but there's a lot more work to be done. But this was obviously something that, you know, is such a rare event, and then it was combined with COVID-19 that it hit us very hard. So, but we do have a plan in place.
Yeah, I would only add to the mayor's comments that we have a lengthy process that's been taking place all across the province, including, of course, with the community of Fort McMurray, as the mayor says, with flood planning and flood mitigation projects being developed. Zoning and those conversations are part of that. Flood mapping and the overall conversation of the best way to manage water and communities that interact with rivers like Fort McMurray. That work will continue. There has been, as the mayor mentioned already, flood mitigation efforts that have been undertaken in that community, and I anticipate that work will continue. I do think it's important to note that an ice jam is different than other flood events that we see, so some of it is significantly more unpredictable when you're dealing with ice. And from our perspective right now, I think from the municipality and the provincial government's perspective right now, our first priority right now is to clean up the town and get people back to their homes safely, deal with the immediate emergency situation, and then after we're done that, we'll continue with the work that we're already doing between the province and the municipalities when it comes to flood mitigation and flood protection efforts.
Do you have a follow-up, Rafi?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. We'll go to the next question.
Our next question comes from Colin Gallant of Medicine Hat News. Your line is open.
Hi there. I'm maybe jumping the queue here, but I'm wondering if someone from Environment can talk a little bit about the flood risk across the province and what we're expecting in other areas, specifically southern Alberta.
Well, across the province, we have had some off and on trouble over the last few weeks in regards to ice jams. Obviously, these two jams in particular have had the greatest impact on Albertans and on communities, but I think we were up to about 8 jams that we've had to manage in some ways over the last several weeks, most of them in northern Alberta, one that I'm aware of in central Alberta, none that I am aware of in southern. I think we are headed to the end of that season. We'll have to see how the next few days go, but the reality is we're melting out and the ice appears to be moving on. But our flood seasons usually take place much further into spring. We're not quite to the traditional period of time where we see flooding, particularly in your neck of the woods and in central Alberta. And the reality is for us to see floods in those communities, we usually need 2 factors. One is a large snowpack, and second is lots of precipitation. We can tell you that we do have a significant snowpack in parts of the eastern slopes and in parts of the province that we're monitoring. But this far out, we don't know what precipitation and the rainfall will be. So we'll be monitoring it closely, and we have both municipalities and the provincial government have steps in place to be ready to react to those situations as they arise. But we're not in a spot where we can accurately predict floods that far out.
You have a follow-up, Colin?
And I'm just wondering if the emergency center is providing guidance to municipalities about reworking their flood plans in light of COVID or their emergency.
Yeah, and I have representatives from the emergency from the POC here today. I'll bring them up to answer that question in detail for the tasks that they're doing and the processes that they're putting in place. But without a doubt, that has added an extra level of difficulty to managing an emergency situation like we've seen in the north over the last few days for both the province and municipalities to have to be able to manage essentially what are 2 emergencies at the same time. But precautions have been taken and different steps have been taken along the way to be able to try to manage both COVID and the flooding situation. And from what I can see, and I think the municipal leaders will agree, they've had a lot of success dealing with that, but I'll see if they want to add anything specific to some of the steps they've taken.
Scott, you want to?
Scott.
Fantastic, thanks.
Scott Long, Executive Director, Operations, Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Just to add on quickly that we have been engaged with all of the communities. As early as January, we did a hazard season outlook in the early part of March. Looked at fire season, obviously looked at potential impacts of COVID-19 and flood mitigation efforts. A lot of the communities along the riverine system have been provided grants for mitigation measures, flood mitigation measures. We have the provincial stockpile, which is engaged right now with tiger dams that have been moved to the north, specifically in the area of RMWB. So I can confidently say that those communities that do live or are along the river systems are well aware and have been engaged and have looked at all of their flood plans.
Awesome. I think we've got a couple more, so we'll take the next question on the line.
Our next question comes from Kenny Trenton of Kicks FM. Your line is open.
Thank you. My first question would be for Reeve Knelson. Mr. Reeve, first question I have for you is that you had mentioned that the waters are starting to go down there a little bit. Obviously, at least from what I've seen in the forecast, there's quite a bit of rain over the last, I'd say, 18 hours or so. Has that thrown anything into it, and have you been in a position to be able to survey any of the damage in Fort Vermilion and area yet?
Thanks, Kenny. No, the rain, the flooding threat is past. The river's broken far enough downstream that we don't feel any potential threat of the water coming up to a dangerous level again. We're currently doing damage assessments. What that is, we still don't know. I don't know if you've seen some of the pictures that we've posted, but there's an incredible amount of ice cover on a lot of properties. So we don't know what the damage is at this time.
And I would just add to that, if I could, the Alberta Environment River Forecasting Team is looking at forecasting as far out as they can. They're not anticipating a significant amount of precipitation that would impact flooding in these communities in any way, and are fairly confident that as the ice jam has moved down, that we are through this immediate emergency as far as increasing the water level inside these communities.
Awesome. Do you have a follow-up?
I do, and this one likely would be for Minister Nixon. Minister, we know we're hearing a lot of things about flood mitigation and potential flood mitigation ideas both in Fort McMurray and Fort Vermilion, but as you and others have mentioned quite a few times, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, act of God, as insurance companies would call it. What kind of measures can you take to mitigate against something that would happen once in a century?
Well, you can never mitigate to completely eliminate all the hazards. Unfortunately, there's just no mechanism for anybody to do that. But we have taken steps all across the province, and the mayor can speak to some of the projects that have happened in his community that are already complete, and some of the other projects that are being worked on in future years. But we can take steps to help divert water, to help dike in areas, to help protect infrastructure. The other steps we can take are things like stockpiling supplies and making sure that we have emergency response teams in place. The work that the river forecasting team does to be able to track ice and to track water levels, to be able to give notification to municipalities, to be able to react, to take efforts to protect critical infrastructure like they did with the Fort McMurray Hospital. So there are lots of mechanisms, but again, there's no way to completely eliminate the hazard. That's the nature of the business. I think right now what's important for both these communities, though, is focusing on that reentry and the cleanup and getting people safe into their homes, and then continuing the long-term conversations on the best way to protect our communities.
Go to the next question, please.
Our next question comes from Sarah Ryan of Global News. Your line is open.
Hello, Minister Nixon. I'm just looking for some information. We have a business owner in Fort Vermilion today. We've lost 3 businesses badly damaged in the flooding there. I'm wondering what type of relief we can expect for business owners impacted.
So the immediate focus was the announcement that the Premier made yesterday about making sure that evacuees from these communities are secure financially so that they're able to be housed and deal with their immediate needs, food, water, and shelter. But both of these communities are at 1 in 100 events, and there'll be an emergency rebuilding process that will take place. The Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Minister of Treasury will have more to say in the coming days, and that conversation will happen, of course, in partnership with our municipal partners. And we'll roll through how we're gonna handle that rebuild and reentry stage now that we're starting to transition out of the immediate emergency. But the immediate focus is making sure that people have the resources to be able to survive in the short term over the next few days, and then we'll head to the longer term plan.
Do you have a follow-up, Sarah?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I think we have one more, so I'll take that.
Our next question comes from Jacob LeBlanc of Windspeaker. Your line is open.
Hi, this goes to Mayor Scott and Minister Nixon. Earlier this week, Chief Alan Adam kind of expressed some concern about the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation and worrying that there could be some flood damage coming towards their nation starting next week. I'm wondering if you've just been in contact with them and if there is any danger coming towards that area, especially with their airport there, their only way of not communication, but travel to any other places?
I'll let you start with that, Mayor Scott.
Sure. Sorry, did you want me to start with that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, I can give a very recent update. I spoke to one of my counselors who lives in Fort Chipewyan about an hour ago, and then I later spoke to a couple of people from ACFN. So there is concern. My council colleague who lives in Fort Chipewyan said that he does not anticipate that there will be flooding in that community based on the historical events that he's seen. The delta up there can take a lot of water, so he's feeling very confident. Having said that, I guess you never know with Mother Nature, but there was a lot of confidence expressed that he does not believe there will be flooding. There are a few low-lying structures that everyone's going to keep an eye on, though.
Yeah, our understanding from Alberta Environment's River Forecast team is exactly what the mayor said. We believe that there is no immediate risk of significant flooding in those communities. They may be watching some lower buildings, which of course is important, but we believe that there's enough capacity for water in the system. That doesn't mean that we don't stop watching, though, and so our teams will continue to monitor the situation as we do all across the province, and if that situation changes, we'll take action. And my colleague, Minister Wilson, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, is in constant contact with all the chiefs in Northern Alberta, making sure that we're aware of what's taking place in their communities and able to react if needed to.
Is there a follow-up?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Super. Okay, I think we actually have one more question, so we'll pop that one through. Thanks.
Next question is from Jeremy Thompson of CTV. Your line is open.
Hi there. I think this question might just be for Mayor Scott there. We're hearing from some evacuees about the accommodations that they're being kind of directed towards through the municipality, being in places like oil sands camps and that sort of thing, and they're bringing up some pretty serious concerns about just COVID-19 there, and so I guess the question is, what sort of reassurances can you give, or what sort of advice is there to give for these folks who are, being sent to places where there's going to be quite a few people, and they're worried about the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a very valid concern. I've been, as soon as I heard that we were going to be directing people toward camps, it's something that raised my eyebrows. But I can tell you that we have told everyone that all COVID measures that have been imposed must be enforced, and not just enforced, but enforced rigorously. So we're doing a very rigorous job making sure that happens, and we expect that all COVID measures are going to be followed. Anyone who's been to the oil sands knows that we are a very safety-conscious region because of all the work that goes on here with heavy machinery and other things. So I believe, based on all the feedback that I'm getting, is that those camps are treating this issue very seriously, and all COVID protections are in place.
Yeah, if I could, Mayor, I'll just add to that. The Alberta Emergency Management Agency, in partnership with the municipalities, has been focusing on using different types of housing, making sure that motels were used, and camps in particular, because we could create space between family units that are evacuating. All efforts have been made to provide adequate personal protective equipment and to take steps to be able to interact with evacuees and personnel who are working on the ground to protect people from the pandemic, stuff like drive-through registration and different steps along the way. The reality is they're dealing with a tough situation up there, multiple emergencies, one being the pandemic and a flood, but they have taken significant efforts to deal with COVID-19 at the same time as dealing with the flood. And from what I saw when I was on the ground, those efforts seem to be working.
You have a follow-up, John?
Yeah, just quickly, some similar concerns about, in town as well, folks who are going to the grocery stores who are, that are still open, not wearing masks and that sort of thing. We know that there's a kind of an exemption from Dr. Hinshaw for this region, but, obviously you don't want to kind of just throw all of the measures out, but you said there's some strict enforcement in the sort of oil sands camps areas. Are you going to see some similar enforcement type activity in town here itself?
Well, I think
one thing I can update you on is that I visited all the grocery stores that are still open yesterday. I just wanted to make sure that they had adequate supplies coming in. which they do. But as part of that, we talked about the COVID-19 measures in each of the stores, and the way it's working is that they're only letting so many people in the stores right now, and all the stores have various markings and reminders everywhere that people must social distance, and that's something that we're trying to enforce throughout the community. Now, we have had some reports of kids playing basketball and other things, and whenever we hear those reports, we refer that to our bylaw, and our enforcement officials go out and take action. So as long as people are reporting concerns or breaches to us, we're going to take action on them. We want to make sure that this community stays safe and stays as COVID-free as we can make it.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Alberta Health Services has been working with all the teams that are in the area to put in as many precautions as they can and keep people safe. And Dr. Hinshaw has not provided widespread exemptions in the area. What you're referring to are exemptions to emergency personnel or crews that are working to install sandbags or different types of infrastructure to protect infrastructure and need to be closer together as they do that. But the goal throughout this evacuation has been to maintain as much protection for COVID-19 as possible, observing social distancing and other precautions along the way.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.